The orange tabby cat hissed so violently at the station master that the man stumbled backward into a water barrel, and Eleanor Whitmore knew this journey west had been a terrible mistake. She clutched the wicker carrier tighter as Marmalade's yellow eyes blazed through the wooden slats, his fury directed at every male within spitting distance of the train platform. The September heat of 1876 pressed down on Silver Creek, Montana territory, turning the dusty Main Street into a shimmering ribbon of discomfort. Eleanor's wool traveling dress clung to her back, and her carefully pinned hair had begun to escape its confines during the 3-day journey from Philadelphia. Miss Whitmore. A voice called from near the ticket office, and Eleanor turned to see a woman in her 50s approaching with a cautious smile. The woman's eyes flickered to the carrier, where Marmalade had begun a low, threatening growl. "I'm Mrs. Henderson. I run the boarding house where you'll be staying until the wedding." Eleanor felt her stomach twist at the word. Wedding. She was here to marry a man she had never met, a rancher named Gerald Pritchard who had advertised for a wife in the Philadelphia Gazette. His letters had been polite, businesslike, promising a comfortable home and security. He had not mentioned love, and Eleanor had not expected it. At 23, with her parents dead and her brother's wife making it clear she was an unwelcome burden in their home, practical considerations outweighed romantic dreams. "Thank you for meeting me," Eleanor said, grateful to see a friendly female face. "I apologize for Marmalade. He has been through quite an ordeal." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. "Poor creature, I heard about the fire." The fire that had killed Eleanor's parents had also traumatized Marmalade, who had been trapped in the burning building with her father. Neighbors had heard the cat's screams and her father's attempts to save him. By the time they were pulled from the wreckage, her father had succumbed to the smoke, but Marmalade had survived, forever changed. The cat who had once been friendly to everyone now viewed every man as a threat, attacking with claws and teeth any male who came too close. "Mr. Pritchard knows about the cat?" Mrs. Henderson asked carefully as they began walking toward the boarding house. "I mentioned I had a pet," Eleanor said, which was not quite a lie but not quite the truth either. Gerald's response had been brief, stating that a cat would be fine for keeping mice from the house. She suspected he had imagined a docile female mouser, not a battle-scarred tomcat with a vendetta against half the human population. The boarding house sat at the end of Main Street, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. Mrs. Henderson led Eleanor to a small room on the 2nd floor, carefully staying back as Eleanor released Marmalade from his carrier. The cat immediately disappeared under the bed, his tail lashing. "Mr. Pritchard will call tomorrow at noon," Mrs. Henderson said. "The wedding is planned for Saturday, 3 days from now. That should give you time to rest and prepare." After Mrs. Henderson left, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and fought the urge to cry. She had made this choice with clear eyes, knowing it meant leaving everything familiar behind. But the reality of marrying a stranger in a strange land suddenly felt overwhelming. She reached under the bed to stroke Marmalade's fur, and the cat's angry rumbling slowly subsided into a reluctant purr. "We will make the best of this," she whispered. "We must." The next morning, Eleanor woke to sounds of activity on the street below. She washed her face in the basin, changed into her second-best dress, a dark blue cotton that showed the dust less than her traveling clothes, and attempted to repair her hair. Marmalade watched from the windowsill, his attention fixed on something outside. At precisely noon, heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs, followed by a knock. Eleanor opened the door to find a large man in his 40s, his belly straining against a brocade vest, his face flushed from the climb. Gerald Pritchard's letters had not mentioned his age or appearance, and Eleanor felt a fresh wave of apprehension. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his eyes traveling over her in assessment. "You are as handsome as your photograph suggested." Before Eleanor could respond, Marmalade launched himself from the windowsill with a yowl that made Gerald stumble backward. The cat's claws extended toward the man's face, and only Eleanor's quick grab at his tail prevented contact. She pulled Marmalade against her chest as he writhed and spat. "What in blazes is wrong with that creature?" Gerald demanded, his face reddening further. "He was traumatized in a fire. He has difficulty with men now," Eleanor said, struggling to hold the furious cat. "I mentioned him in my letter." "You said you had a pet, not a demon," Gerald said. "That animal cannot come to my ranch. I will not have a wild beast attacking me in my own home." Eleanor felt ice slide through her veins despite the heat. "Marmalade goes where I go, Mr. Pritchard. He is all I have left of my family." Gerald's expression hardened. "Then I suggest you reconsider this arrangement, Miss Whitmore. I need a wife, not a zookeeper. You have until tomorrow to decide whether you can be reasonable about this matter." He turned and descended the stairs, his heavy tread echoing through the building. Eleanor closed the door and sank onto the bed, Marmalade still tense in her arms. She had no money for a return ticket. Her brother had made it clear she was not welcome back in Philadelphia. Gerald Pritchard was her only option in Silver Creek, and he had just issued an ultimatum she could not accept. "What am I going to do?" she asked Marmalade, who had calmed enough to wash his face with one paw, unconcerned by the disaster he had caused. That afternoon, Eleanor ventured downstairs to find Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with strong, practiced motions. The older woman looked up and immediately read the distress on Eleanor's face. "Sit down, dear. Tell me what happened." Eleanor explained the situation, her voice breaking as she reached the part about Gerald's ultimatum. Mrs. Henderson listened, her mouth pressed into a thin line. "Gerald Pritchard is a difficult man at the best of times," she said finally. "But I had hoped he would have more understanding for a young woman in your situation." "I have nowhere to go," Eleanor said, and saying it aloud made it real and terrifying. "I should never have come here. I should never have believed I could build a new life, Mrs." Henderson wiped her hands on her apron and sat across from Eleanor at the scarred wooden table. "There might be another option. The Crawford Ranch, about 5 miles outside town, has been looking for help. Lucas Crawford's wife passed 2 years ago, and he is raising 3 children on his own while trying to keep the ranch running. He needs a housekeeper, someone to cook and help with the children. It would not be the same as marriage, but it would be honest work and a roof over your head." Eleanor's heart lifted slightly. "Do you think he would consider me, even with Marmalade?" "Lucas Crawford is a good man," Mrs. Henderson said carefully, "but I will be honest with you. His wife's death nearly broke him. He has not looked at another woman since Sarah passed, and he likely never will. If you go there hoping for romance, you will be disappointed." "I am not looking for romance," Eleanor said, surprising herself with how true that felt. The idea of being valued for her work rather than her potential as a wife suddenly seemed far more appealing. "I just need a chance to prove myself." Mrs. Henderson nodded. "I will send word to Lucas today. He usually comes to town on Fridays for supplies. That gives you 2 days to prepare and to give Gerald your final answer." The next morning, Eleanor composed a carefully worded letter to Gerald Pritchard, thanking him for his consideration but explaining that circumstances had changed and she could not proceed with their arrangement. She paid one of Mrs. Henderson's sons to deliver it, then spent the rest of the day in anxious anticipation of Friday. When Friday arrived, Eleanor dressed in her most practical outfit and secured her hair in a simple bun. She had packed her few belongings and settled her account with Mrs. Henderson, who had refused to take payment for the last 2 nights. "Consider it an investment in your future," the older woman said with a kind smile. "Lucas should be here within the hour." Eleanor waited on the porch, Marmalade's carrier at her feet. The cat had been surprisingly calm since Gerald's departure, as if he sensed that particular threat had passed. Eleanor watched the street, noting the various businesses that lined it. A general store, a blacksmith, a saloon from which sounds of midday revelry already emerged. Silver Creek was rougher than Philadelphia, rower, but there was an energy to it that Eleanor found herself drawn to despite her circumstances. A wagon appeared at the far end of the street, drawn by two sturdy horses. As it approached, Eleanor could make out the driver, a man in his late 20s with dark hair that needed cutting and a face made severe by grief and hard work. He wore simple ranch clothes, dusty and well-worn, and his hands on the reins were scarred and capable. Lucas Crawford pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the boarding house and climbed down with the easy grace of someone comfortable with physical labor. He was tall, lean, with blue eyes that held a wariness Eleanor recognized from her own mirror. Miss Whitmore. His voice was quiet, gravelly from lack of use in conversation. Mrs. Henderson sent word you might be interested in the housekeeper position. Yes, Eleanor said, rising from her chair. Thank you for considering me. Lucas's eyes dropped to the carrier, from which Marmalade had begun a low, warning growl. You have a cat. Yes, his name is Marmalade. I apologize for not mentioning him in advance, but he is not negotiable. He goes where I go. Something that might have been respect flickered in Lucas's eyes. Fair enough. My children will be pleased. They have been asking for a pet, though I imagine they expected something less vocal. As if on cue, Marmalade released a yowl that made the horses shift in their traces. Lucas moved to calm them, and Marmalade's growl intensified, his orange fur visible through the slats as he pressed against the side of the carrier nearest to Lucas. He does not like men, Eleanor said quickly. He was in a fire that killed my father. Since then, he has been aggressive toward any male who comes near. Lucas studied the carrier for a long moment. That will be a problem. I have 3 children, 2 of them boys. If your cat attacks them, he will have to go, Miss Whitmore. I will not put my children at risk. Eleanor's heart sank, but Lucas held up a hand before she could respond. However, he continued, Mrs. Henderson speaks highly of you and I am in desperate need of help. If you are willing to try, so am I. We will see how the cat adjusts. But you need to understand that my children's safety comes first. I understand completely, Eleanor said. Marmalade has never attacked a child. His anger seems reserved for grown men. Then we will manage. Lucas picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing and loaded it into the wagon bed. Eleanor carried Marmalade's carrier and her carpet bag, settling both carefully before allowing Lucas to help her onto the wagon seat. His hand was warm and calloused through her glove, and he released her the moment she was settled, as if the brief contact had been uncomfortable for him. The ride to the Crawford Ranch took nearly an hour, following a rutted track that wound through rolling grassland dotted with cattle. Lucas spoke little, pointing out landmarks when necessary, but otherwise keeping his attention on the horses and the road. Eleanor did not mind the silence. It gave her time to study the landscape, so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia. The sky seemed impossibly vast, stretching from horizon to horizon in an endless blue expanse. The air smelled of sage and dust, and something wild she could not name. The ranch house appeared as they crested a low hill, a sprawling single-story structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch and several outbuildings visible beyond. A barn stood to the left, its doors open to reveal the dim interior. Chickens scratched in a fenced yard, and a dog began barking as the wagon approached. 3 children tumbled out of the house as Lucas pulled the horses to a stop. The oldest, a girl of about 11 with her father's dark hair and serious eyes, held back slightly, but the 2 younger boys, perhaps 8 and 5, rushed forward with the enthusiasm of puppies. "Did you bring us candy?" the youngest asked, his round face hopeful. "Mind your manners, Samuel," the girl said, but her eyes were on Eleanor, curious and cautious. "Children, this is Miss Whitmore," Lucas said, climbing down from the wagon. "She will be helping with the house and cooking. I expect you to be respectful and follow her instructions." "Yes, Papa," the girl said. The 2 boys echoed her, though Samuel was now staring at Marmalade's carrier with fascination. "What is that?" he asked, pointing. "This is Marmalade," Eleanor said, grateful for the children's distraction from her own nervousness. "He is my cat. But you must be very gentle with him. He was hurt badly and is still learning to trust again." "Can we see him?" the middle boy asked. Eleanor thought Lucas had said his name was Thomas during their brief conversation. "Not just yet," Eleanor said. "He needs to adjust to his new home first. Perhaps in a few days, when he is feeling safer." Lucas helped Eleanor down from the wagon, maintaining the same careful distance as before, and gestured toward the house. "I will show you where you will be staying, then the children can show you around while I unload your things." The interior of the ranch house was dim after the bright sunlight, and Eleanor paused to let her eyes adjust. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was simple but well-made, and everything spoke of a woman's touch now absent. Faded curtains hung at the windows, and a braided rug covered the center of the floor, but dust filmed every surface and dishes were piled in the dry sink. "Your room is through here," Lucas said, leading her down a short hallway. He opened a door to reveal a small bedroom with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the front yard. "It is not much, but it is private." "It is perfect," Eleanor said honestly. After sharing a room with her sister-in-law's children in Philadelphia and the cramped quarters at the boarding house, having her own space felt like luxury. Lucas nodded once and left, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The girl, whose name Eleanor learned was Margaret, stepped forward with the careful politeness of a child forced to grow up too quickly. "I am pleased to meet you, Miss Whitmore. Thomas and Samuel can be a handful, but they mean well." "I am pleased to meet you as well, Margaret," Eleanor said, crouching down to be at eye level with the child. "I hope we can be friends." Something in Margaret's serious expression softened. "I hope so too. We have not had a woman in the house since Mama died." The naked longing in the child's voice made Eleanor's throat tight. "Then we shall have to help each other learn how to make this house a home again." Eleanor released Marmalade into her room and closed the door firmly, leaving him to explore in safety while she began assessing the work that needed to be done. The children followed her like ducklings as she moved through the house, answering her questions about where things were kept and what their routines had been before their mother's death. By the time Lucas finished unloading the wagon and came back inside, Eleanor had already started heating water for washing dishes and had Margaret showing her where the cooking supplies were stored. Lucas paused in the doorway, watching the activity with an expression Eleanor could not quite read. "Supper is usually at 6, he said finally. "I will leave you to settle in." He disappeared back outside, and Eleanor noticed how his children's faces fell slightly at his departure, as if they had hoped their father might stay and be part of the renewed energy in the house. She made a mental note to find ways to draw Lucas into family life, not for romance, but because these children needed their father present, not just providing. The first week at the Crawford Ranch passed in a blur of work. Eleanor rose before dawn to start breakfast, cleaned the house from top to bottom, washed what seemed like mountains of laundry, and cooked 3 meals a day for 5 people. The children were starved for female attention and followed her constantly, chattering about their days and showing her treasures they had collected. Margaret, in particular, blossomed under Eleanor's attention, slowly shedding the two-adult mantle she had assumed after her mother's death. Lucas remained distant, polite but reserved. He ate his meals quickly and returned to work, often not coming back to the house until well after dark. Eleanor saw him primarily at breakfast and supper, and their conversations rarely extended beyond practical matters of household management and the children's needs. Marmalade, meanwhile, had become the household's greatest challenge and unexpected entertainment. Eleanor had been carefully introducing the cat to the house in stages, keeping him in her room for the first few days, and then allowing him supervised exploration of the main rooms when Lucas was outside. The children were enchanted by the orange tabby, especially once Eleanor explained why he was afraid of men. "So he is like a soldier with battle scars," Thomas said, his 8-year-old face serious with understanding. "Papa says some soldiers come home different from the war." "Exactly like that," Eleanor agreed, touched by the boy's insight. Samuel, at 5, had a simpler view. "He just needs to know not all men are bad," he announced with the confidence of the very young. "We will show him." The children's patience with Marmalade was remarkable. They sat quietly while he explored, spoke in soft voices, and never tried to grab him or force interaction. Gradually, Marmalade began to tolerate their presence, though he still fled whenever Lucas's footsteps sounded on the porch. It was Lucas himself who had the most difficulty with the cat. Every morning when he entered the kitchen for breakfast, Marmalade would puff up to twice his normal size, his tail resembling a bottle brush, and release a series of hisses and growls that made conversation impossible. Lucas bore this with stoic patience, but Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw tightened. "I am truly sorry," she said one morning after a particularly dramatic display. "I am working with him, but he is very stubborn." "So I have noticed," Lucas said dryly, and Eleanor realized it was the first trace of humor she had heard from him. 2 weeks into Eleanor's tenure, disaster struck. Eleanor had been hanging laundry on the line behind the house, with Marmalade sunning himself on a nearby rock, carefully positioned so he could watch the clothesline activity while remaining out of range of the barn, where Lucas was working. Samuel came running from the house, excited about something, and did not see the cat until he tripped over him. Samuel's scream brought Eleanor running, her heart in her throat, but when she reached them, she found boy and cat staring at each other in mutual shock. Marmalade had every reason to attack, had every justification for his claws, but something in Samuel's open, tear-filled face seemed to reach the damaged creature. The cat slowly relaxed his battle stance, sniffed Samuel's outstretched hand, and butted his head against the boy's palm. "He likes me," Samuel whispered, wonder transforming his tear-stained face. "Miss Eleanor, he likes me." Eleanor sank down beside them, her legs suddenly weak with relief. "He does. You must have a very gentle soul, Samuel." From that day forward, Marmalade and Samuel became inseparable. The cat followed the boy around the house, slept on his bed, and purred like a rusty engine whenever Samuel petted him. Thomas and Margaret, seeing their younger brother's success, approached Marmalade with renewed confidence, and within days, the cat had accepted all 3 children. But Lucas remained Marmalade's enemy. The cat's hatred seemed to intensify rather than diminish as the children won him over, as if Lucas represented something uniquely threatening. Eleanor began to wonder if Lucas reminded Marmalade of her father, or if the rancher's grief and emotional distance registered to the cat as danger. One evening, 3 weeks after Eleanor's arrival, she found Lucas on the porch after supper, staring out at the darkening landscape. The children were in bed and the house was quiet behind them. Eleanor had come out to shake crumbs from the tablecloth and found herself hesitating, uncertain whether to intrude on his solitude. "The children seem happier," Lucas said without turning around. "You have been good for them." "They are wonderful children," Eleanor said, moving to stand at the porch rail, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You should be very proud. Sarah would be pleased to see them thriving again." His voice was soft, full of an ache that had not diminished with time. "I have tried to be both parents to them, but I am not enough. You are their father and they love you very much," Eleanor said gently. "But children need many people in their lives to help them grow. It is not a failing to accept help." Lucas turned to look at her, and in the fading light his face looked younger, less burdened. "You are wise for someone so young, Miss Whitmore." "I am 23, Mr. Crawford, hardly a girl, and wisdom often comes from loss. I understand something of what your children have experienced." They stood in companionable silence, listening to the evening sounds of the ranch. A coyote called in the distance, and the horses nickered softly in the barn. Eleanor felt something shift between them, not romance, but the beginnings of real friendship, of mutual respect between two people trying to build something from the ruins of their losses. "The cat still hates me," Lucas said, and there was definite humor in his voice now. Eleanor laughed, surprised by her own mirth. "Yes, he does, with admirable consistency." "I am almost impressed by his dedication," Lucas admitted. "I have never been hated so thoroughly by an animal before." "He hated Gerald Pritchard even more, if that is any consolation," Eleanor offered. "The man you were supposed to marry," Lucas's voice sharpened with interest. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned something about that. He wanted you to get rid of Marmalade. He gave me an ultimatum, the cat or the marriage." Eleanor shrugged, though the memory still stung. "I chose the cat." "Good," Lucas said firmly. "Any man who would force that choice is not worth having." The conviction in his voice warmed Eleanor. "I thought so too, though it left me in difficult circumstances." "I am glad for your difficult circumstances," Lucas said. "We needed you here." It was the kindest thing he had said to her, and Eleanor felt her cheeks warm with pleasure. "Thank you. I am glad to be here." Over the following weeks, Eleanor and Lucas settled into an easy routine built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They discussed the children's education, the household budget, and plans for the coming winter. Lucas began staying longer at meals, drawn into the lively conversations the children generated with Eleanor's encouragement. He even smiled occasionally, transforming his stern face into something warm and unexpectedly handsome. Eleanor found herself thinking about Lucas more than was strictly appropriate for an employer-employee relationship. She noticed the strength in his shoulders when he carried heavy loads, the gentleness of his hands when he helped Samuel with his boots, the rare sound of his laughter when Thomas told a terrible joke. She firmly reminded herself that Lucas was still mourning his wife, that he saw Eleanor as nothing more than hired help, and that romantic fantasies had no place in her practical life. But the heart, Eleanor was discovering, had little interest in practical considerations. The breakthrough with Marmalade came unexpectedly one October afternoon. Lucas had been mending fence all day and returned to the house exhausted, with a gash on his hand from a slip with the wire cutters. Eleanor was preparing supper when he came through the door, and she immediately saw the blood dripping onto the floor. "Sit down," she commanded, abandoning the potatoes she had been peeling. "Let me see that." Lucas obeyed, too tired to argue, and held out his hand. The cut was deep, running across his palm and still bleeding freely. Eleanor worked quickly, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made Lucas hiss through his teeth, then binding it tightly with clean cloth. "You need to be more careful," she scolded, though her hands were gentle. "This could have been much worse." "Yes, ma'am," Lucas said, and there was a softness in his eyes as he watched her work that made Eleanor's breath catch. She was tying off the bandage when Marmalade appeared from the hallway, drawn by the commotion. The cat froze when he saw Lucas, his ears flattening, but then something extraordinary happened. Marmalade's nose twitched, catching the scent of blood and whiskey, and his posture changed. Instead of puffing up in anger, he approached slowly, his tail low but not lashing. Eleanor and Lucas both held perfectly still as Marmalade came closer, sniffing the air. The cat stopped just out of arm's reach and sat down, his yellow eyes fixed on Lucas's bandaged hand. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Marmalade stood, took 2 steps forward, and gently touched his nose to Lucas's wounded hand. "Easy," Lucas murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am not going to hurt you, cat." Marmalade considered this, his tail twitching once. Then, in a move that shocked Eleanor to her core, the cat jumped onto Lucas's lap, circled once, and settled down, his purr audible in the quiet kitchen. Lucas's eyes met Eleanor's, wide with amazement. "What do I do?" "Do not move," Eleanor breathed. "Just let him be." They stayed frozen like that for several minutes, Lucas's uninjured hand hovering uncertainly over the cat, while Marmalade purred and kneaded his claws gently against Lucas's leg. Finally, Lucas carefully lowered his hand and stroked Marmalade's orange fur. The cat's purr intensified. I will be damned, Lucas said softly. He actually likes me. He does, Eleanor said, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. Something about seeing the scarred, angry cat finally accept comfort from a man felt profoundly significant, as if Marmalade's healing represented something larger, something about the possibility of moving past trauma and learning to trust again. From that day forward, Marmalade divided his affections between Samuel and Lucas. The cat took to following Lucas around the ranch, sitting on fence posts while Lucas worked, and sleeping on the end of his bed at night. Lucas, for his part, seemed bemused by this turn of events but accepted it with good grace, often seen talking to the cat while doing chores. I think Marmalade knew you were hurt, Samuel announced one evening at supper, his 5-year-old face serious with thought. He knew you needed a friend. Perhaps he did, Lucas agreed, scratching the cat's ears. Marmalade sat beside Lucas's chair, lordly in his new position as favored companion. Eleanor watched this scene with a mixture of joy and confusion. She was thrilled that Marmalade had finally overcome his fear, but the sight of Lucas gentling the damaged cat did something dangerous to her heart. She found herself imagining what it would be like to have Lucas's tenderness directed at her, to be the recipient of those careful touches and soft words. The thoughts were improper and unwelcome, and she pushed them away firmly. Lucas was her employer. He was still mourning his wife. She had no right to these feelings, but the feelings persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. Eleanor caught herself watching Lucas across the supper table, memorizing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at his children, the sound of his rare laughter, the competence of his hands at any task. She lay awake at night, aware that he was just down the hall, separated from her by wooden walls and impossible circumstances. November arrived, bringing cold winds and the first threats of snow. Eleanor had been at the ranch for 2 months, and the household ran with smooth efficiency now. The children were thriving, the house was clean and warm, and Lucas had regained some of the weight his grief had carved away. Eleanor took pride in these accomplishments, even as she struggled with her growing feelings for a man who seemed to see her only as his children's caretaker. Then came the night that changed everything. Eleanor woke to the sound of someone moving through the house and rose, thinking one of the children might be ill. She pulled on her robe and stepped into the hallway to find Lucas standing at the window, staring out at the moonlit landscape. He wore only trousers and an undershirt, and his hair was disheveled from sleep. "Mr. Crawford, is something wrong?" Eleanor asked softly, not wanting to startle him. Lucas turned, and in the moonlight she could see the tracks of tears on his face. "I am sorry. I did not mean to wake you. I just needed to walk for a moment. Sometimes the dreams are too much." Eleanor's heart contracted with sympathy. "Dreams of your wife, of the day she died," Lucas said, his voice raw. "She fell from a horse, broke her neck. I was a mile away, mending fence, and I did not even know until Margaret came running." He pressed his palms against his eyes as if he could push back the memories. "I have been so angry, Miss Whitmore. Angry at the horse, at myself for not being there, at God for taking her, at Sarah for leaving us. And I am tired of being angry. I am tired of grieving, but I do not know how to stop." Eleanor moved closer, drawn by his pain. "Grief is not something you can simply decide to stop. It becomes part of you, part of who you are, but it can change. It can become less sharp, less consuming. It can become memory instead of wound." "How do you know this?" Lucas asked, lowering his hands to look at her. "Because I learned to carry my grief for my parents," Eleanor said. "Some days it is a whisper, barely noticeable. Other days it roars. But it no longer defines every moment of my life. I can feel joy again without feeling guilty. I can imagine a future that holds happiness." "I do not know if I can do that," Lucas said. "Sarah was everything to me. She was your wife, the mother of your children, and you loved her deeply," Eleanor said. "But she would not want you frozen in this moment, unable to move forward. She would want you to live, to find happiness again, to show your children that loss does not mean the end of everything good." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "I think I might be ready to try, and I think it might have something to do with you, Miss Whitmore." Eleanor's heart began to pound so hard she was certain he could hear it. "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere in the last 2 months you stopped being just my housekeeper. You became essential, not just to my children, though God knows they adore you, but to me. I find myself thinking about you when I should be thinking about cattle and fences. I listen for your voice, your laugh. I look forward to meals because it means I can sit across from you and watch the way you tilt your head when you are listening to the children's stories." He took a step closer, and Eleanor could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I am falling in love with you, Eleanor, and it terrifies me because I swore I would never feel this way about anyone but Sarah." Eleanor could hardly breathe. "Lucas, I do not want you to betray your wife's memory. If you need more time, I will always love Sarah," Lucas interrupted gently. "But I am beginning to understand that the heart is not as finite as I believed. There is room for honoring what was and embracing what could be, if you are willing, if you feel anything like what I am feeling." "I do," Eleanor whispered, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff into unknown space. "I have been trying to remember my place in your grief, but I do. I love you, Lucas. I love your children, your ranch, the life we have been building together. I love the man you are and the man I see emerging from the shadow of loss." Lucas closed the remaining distance between them and cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent, as if she were something precious and fragile. "I need to do this right," he said. "I need to court you properly, let the children adjust to the idea, make sure this is real and not just my loneliness talking." "That sounds very sensible," Eleanor agreed, though every nerve in her body was singing with the desire to throw sensible behavior aside and kiss him. Lucas smiled, reading her expression accurately. "But perhaps one kiss now would not be too improper, given that we are in our nightclothes in the middle of the night." "That logic seems questionable," Eleanor said, "but I approve." His lips met hers softly, tentatively, as if they were both learning a new language. Eleanor felt the kiss in every part of her body, a warmth that spread from her mouth to her fingertips. Lucas's arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted against him, finally allowing herself to feel the desire she had been suppressing for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you, Eleanor. Not because I need a housekeeper or a mother for my children, though you are wonderful at both, but because you have brought light back into my life. You have shown me that it is possible to honor the past while embracing the future." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "Yes to all of it. Yes to you." They stood in the moonlit hallway, holding each other, while Marmalade appeared from Lucas's room and wound between their legs, purring approval of this new development. The next morning at breakfast, Lucas cleared his throat and announced to his children that he had something important to discuss. 3 young faces turned toward him with varying expressions of curiosity and concern. "Miss Eleanor and I have decided that we would like to be married," Lucas said, reaching for Eleanor's hand across the table. "But only if that would make you children happy. This is your home too, and your feelings matter very much." Samuel's face lit up like a candle. "Does that mean Miss Eleanor will be our new mother?" "It means she will be my wife and will help me raise you," Lucas said carefully. "She will never replace your mother, but she will love you and care for you as if you were her own children." Margaret, who had been staring at Eleanor with wide eyes, suddenly smiled, transforming her serious face. "I think Mama would like you, Miss Eleanor. I think she would be happy that Papa found someone kind." Thomas nodded vigorously. "And Marmalade already chose Papa, so that means it is meant to be, right?" Eleanor laughed, blinking back tears. "I think Marmalade was smarter than all of us. He knew a good man when he saw one, even if it took him a while to admit it." The wedding was planned for the following month, giving Eleanor time to make a new dress and Lucas time to spread the word among their neighbors. Mrs. Henderson came out to the ranch to help with preparations, bringing fabric and advice in equal measure. "I knew something would work out for you," Mrs. Henderson said as she helped Eleanor pin the pattern for her dress. "Though I confess I am surprised at how quickly Lucas came around. That man was so deep in grief I thought he would never surface." "I think he was ready," Eleanor said. "He just needed permission to move forward. And you gave him that," Mrs. Henderson said. "You and that remarkable cat of yours." The wedding took place on a cold December morning in the small church in Silver Creek. Eleanor wore a dress of deep green wool that brought out the gold in her brown hair, and Lucas wore his best suit, his face solemn with joy as Eleanor walked down the aisle. The children sat in the front row, fidgeting with excitement, and Marmalade, in an unprecedented display of tolerance, sat on Margaret's lap without protest. The ceremony was simple, the words familiar, but when Lucas slipped a gold band onto Eleanor's finger and kissed her as his wife, Eleanor felt as if her entire world had realigned into its proper configuration. This was where she belonged. This was the family she was meant to find. The wedding celebration was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and well wishes. Eleanor met the community properly for the first time, no longer as the poor mail-order bride who had lost her groom, but as Lucas Crawford's new wife, accepted and welcomed. She danced with Lucas in the cleared space of the main room, his arms strong around her, his eyes soft with love. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for seeing me when I could not see myself, for being patient with my grief, for loving my children." "Thank you for giving me a home," Eleanor whispered back, "for giving me a purpose, for loving me despite the chaos I brought with me." Lucas laughed. "You mean Marmalade? That cat may have been the best thing that ever happened to me. He taught me that even the most damaged souls can learn to trust again, given time and patience." As if summoned by his name, Marmalade appeared and jumped onto a chair, surveying the party with the air of a king observing his subjects. Samuel immediately went to pet him, and the cat allowed it, purring loudly enough to be heard over the fiddle music. The winter passed in quiet contentment. Eleanor adjusted to her new role as Lucas's wife, discovering that the physical intimacy of marriage was both awkward and wonderful, a learning process that brought them closer with each passing night. Lucas was a tender, patient lover, concerned with her pleasure as much as his own, and Eleanor found joy in this new dimension of their relationship. The children flourished under the security of having two parents again. Margaret began to act her age, playing with dolls instead of constantly trying to mother her brothers. Thomas threw himself into school lessons with Eleanor's encouragement, discovering a love of reading. Samuel remained the family's ray of sunshine, finding wonder in everything from the first snowfall to the way bread dough rose. And Marmalade, the cat who had hated all men, became Lucas's shadow. He sat on the porch while Lucas worked, slept on his pillow at night, and purred whenever Lucas entered a room. Eleanor often found them together in the barn, Lucas talking to the cat while doing chores, Marmalade responding with chirps and meows that sounded remarkably conversational. "I never thought I would be jealous of a cat," Eleanor teased one evening, finding them together by the fire. "He gets more of your attention than I do." Lucas pulled her down beside him, settling her against his side while Marmalade relocated to her lap, clearly feeling he could manage affection for both his favorite humans at once. "There is plenty of me to go around," Lucas said, kissing the top of her head. Spring arrived, bringing the busy season of calving and planting. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant in April, a realization that filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had always wanted children of her own, but the idea of childbirth, of the risks involved, was frightening. Lucas was overjoyed and worried in equal measure when she told him. "Sarah's death had nothing to do with childbirth," he assured Eleanor, reading her unspoken fear. "She was an excellent rider who had a moment of bad luck. You will be fine, we will be fine." "You cannot promise that," Eleanor said quietly. "No," Lucas agreed. "But I can promise that I will be with you every step of the way and we will face whatever comes together." The children were thrilled at the prospect of a baby. Margaret immediately began planning how she would help. Thomas wanted to know if the baby would be a boy who could play with him, and Samuel announced that the baby could share his room and Marmalade. "I think Marmalade will have opinions about that," Eleanor said, laughing at Samuel's generosity. As her pregnancy progressed, Eleanor continued to manage the household with Lucas's increasing help. He became protective to the point of absurdity, trying to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a dish towel. Eleanor tolerated this with good humor, understanding it came from love and old fear. In November, exactly 1 year after their engagement, Eleanor went into labor. Lucas sent Thomas racing to town for the doctor and Mrs. Henderson, then stayed with Eleanor, holding her hand and talking her through the contractions with a calmness she suspected he did not feel. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Eleanor was exhausted, frightened, and in more pain than she had imagined possible. But Lucas never left her side, and Mrs. Henderson, who had attended dozens of births, assured her everything was progressing normally. Finally, as the sun set on the second day, Eleanor delivered a healthy baby boy. Lucas cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he held his newborn son. "He is perfect," Lucas said hoarsely. "You are perfect. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for this gift." Eleanor, exhausted beyond measure, smiled weakly. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but no decision had been made. Now, looking at the baby in Lucas's arms, Eleanor knew with certainty. "William," she said. "After my father, the man Marmalade tried to save." Lucas nodded, understanding the significance. "William Crawford." "It is a good, strong name." The children were allowed in to meet their new brother, clustering around the bed with wide, awed eyes. Marmalade, curious about the commotion, jumped up beside Eleanor and sniffed the baby carefully. Then, in a gesture that made everyone laugh, the cat very gently bumped his head against William's tiny hand before settling beside Eleanor, clearly taking up guard duty. "Marmalade approves," Samuel announced. "That means William will be special." "All of you are special," Eleanor said, looking around at her family. Lucas, his 3 wonderful children, the new baby, and the scarred orange cat who had brought them all together. "We are all exactly where we are supposed to be." The years that followed were full of the normal chaos of a large family. William grew into a sturdy toddler, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Alice, who inherited her father's dark hair and her mother's determination. Margaret grew into a beautiful young woman and eventually married a neighboring rancher's son, staying close enough to visit often. Thomas discovered a passion for horses and took over much of the ranch's training program. Samuel, true to his gentle nature, became a teacher, establishing a small school in Silver Creek. Lucas and Eleanor grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. They had their arguments, their difficult moments, but the foundation they had built was strong enough to weather any storm. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word, building a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. Marmalade lived to the remarkable age of 18, finally passing peacefully in his sleep, curled on Lucas's lap. They buried him under the oak tree near the house, and Lucas carved a marker that read, "Marmalade, a cat who knew a good man when he met one." "He saved my life," Lucas said at the small funeral, surrounded by his family. "He taught me that trust is always possible, even after the deepest wounds. He brought Eleanor to us, and in doing so, gave us all a second chance at happiness." Eleanor, now in her 40s, leaned against her husband and looked around at the family they had built. Margaret stood with her husband and their 2 children. Thomas had brought his sweetheart, a rancher's daughter from the next county. Samuel was there with his wife, a schoolteacher from back east whom he had courted through letters. William and Alice, now teenagers, stood together, somber in their grief for the family pet. "We were all broken in some way when we came together," Eleanor said softly. "Marmalade with his trauma, me with my displacement, you with your grief, the children with their loss." But we learned to trust each other, to love each other, to build something stronger than any of us could have created alone. That night, as Eleanor and Lucas lay in bed, the house quiet around them, Lucas pulled his wife close and kissed her temple. "Do you ever regret choosing the cat over Gerald Pritchard?" he asked, a teasing note in his voice. Eleanor laughed. "Every single day," she said sarcastically. "I often lie awake wondering what my life would have been like married to that pompous man, living in his cold house without you or the children or any of this." "Liar," Lucas said affectionately. "Completely," Eleanor agreed. "I have never regretted a single moment, not even the hardest ones. This life, this family, was worth every uncertainty, every risk." Marmalade knew what he was doing when he hissed at Gerald Pritchard. He was protecting us both, steering us toward what we were meant to find. "A wise cat," Lucas murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "The wisest," Eleanor agreed. She lay awake a while longer, listening to her husband's steady breathing, the soft sounds of the house settling around them, the distant call of an owl in the darkness. 23 years had passed since she had stepped off that train in Silver Creek, terrified and uncertain, carrying a traumatized cat and no prospects. She had been looking for security, for a place to belong, for a practical solution to an impossible situation. Instead, she had found love. Real, deep, transformative love that had changed everyone it touched. She had found a family that needed her as much as she needed them. She had found a home in every sense of the word, and it had all started with a cat who hated men until he found a man worth trusting. Eleanor smiled in the darkness and let herself drift into sleep, grateful beyond measure for the strange and wonderful path that had led her here, to this moment, to this life. The journey had been unexpected, often difficult, but ultimately more rewarding than anything she could have planned or imagined. Sometimes, she thought as sleep claimed her, the best things in life arrive disguised as disasters, traveling in wicker carriers, hissing at everyone in sight, waiting for exactly the right person to prove that trust and love are always possible, even after the deepest wounds. And sometimes, just sometimes, a scarred cat and a grieving cowboy and a displaced woman can find their way to healing together, building something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. The Crawford Ranch thrived for another generation and beyond, passed down through William and then his children, each generation adding their own stories to the foundation Eleanor and Lucas had built. But the original story, the legend of how the ranch's matriarch arrived with a man-hating cat and won the heart of a grieving widower, was told and retold around dinner tables and fireplaces for decades. It became a family tale about the power of patience, the possibility of healing, and the unexpected ways love finds us when we are brave enough to risk trust again. It was a reminder that sometimes our disasters are actually blessings in disguise, that sometimes the creatures we rescue end up rescuing us, and that sometimes a simple cat can see truths that humans miss in their grief and fear. Eleanor and Lucas lived into their 70s, dying within months of each other, their hands still reaching for one another even in those final days. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains and the grasslands they had loved. Near their graves, the oak tree under which Marmalade rested grew tall and strong, its branches spreading shade over the family plot. And if you visited that cemetery on a quiet evening when the wind whispered through the grass and the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, you might see an orange shape moving among the headstones, tail high, padding confidently through the gathering dusk. The locals would tell you it was just a stray, one of the many barn cats that roamed the ranches, nothing supernatural or strange, but the Crawford family knew better. They recognized that particular orange shade, that confident stride, that purposeful movement. Marmalade was still keeping watch over the family he had brought together, still standing guard over the love story he had made possible, still proving that some bonds transcend even death. The story that had begun with a hissing cat in a wicker carrier had become a legend a testament to the transformative power of love, patience, and the courage to trust again after trauma. It was a Wild West tale, yes, with all the expected elements of ranches and cattle and wide-open spaces. But at its heart, it was something more universal and timeless. It was a story about healing, about family both found and made, about the many forms love can take and the unexpected places it can appear, about how sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest blessings, how sometimes we have to lose everything to find what we truly need, and how sometimes a scarred cat with trauma and trust issues can teach humans lessons about resilience and hope that change everything. Eleanor Whitmore Crawford's life had not turned out anything like she had planned when she left Philadelphia on that train, carrying her few possessions and one very angry cat. She had expected practicality, security, a marriage of convenience to a stranger. She had been prepared to settle, to make the best of limited options, to live a life defined by necessity rather than passion. Instead, she found Lucas Crawford, a man as broken as her cat, as desperate for healing as she was. She found 3 children who needed a mother's love and gave it back 100-fold. She found a home in the wild Montana territory, in a landscape as beautiful as it was harsh, in a time and place where survival required strength, but happiness demanded vulnerability. And she found herself, the woman she was meant to be, stripped of pretense and propriety, revealed in the clarity of hard work and honest emotion. The frightened, displaced woman who had stepped off that train had been transformed by love and purpose into someone strong, capable, and deeply content. The catalyst for all of it had been Marmalade, the orange tabby who had survived fire and trauma, who had learned to hate for survival and then relearned trust for love. His journey mirrored everyone else's in the family, from damage to healing, from isolation to connection, from fear to faith. In the end, the story of the mail-order bride who brought a cat that hated all men and the cowboy who won over the cat before the bride was really a story about second chances, about the resilience of the human spirit and the animal soul, about how love, real love, is always worth the risk, always worth the wait, always worth the leap of faith required to open yourself to another person. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through generations as a reminder that even in the hardest times, even after the deepest losses, even when the path forward seems impossible, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of joy waiting somewhere unexpected, if only we are brave enough to recognize it when it arrives, hissing and clawing, in a wicker carrier on a dusty platform in the middle of nowhere. The Crawford family would tell this story for generations, each version adding new details, new emphasis, but always returning to the central truth, that sometimes the best love stories start with a cat who knows something everyone else has yet to learn, and sometimes the greatest journeys begin with what looks like the worst possible disaster. And sometimes, just sometimes, choosing the cat over the conventional path leads exactly where you were always meant to go. And so the legend lived on, as real as the land itself, as enduring as the love that had created it, as hopeful as the first green shoots appearing after the longest winter. The story of Eleanor and Lucas and Marmalade became part of Montana territory folklore, a tale told wherever people gathered to share stories of the old days, of the Wild West, of the time when the land was new, and anything seemed possible for those brave enough to reach for it. It was a story with a happy ending, which was perhaps the most remarkable thing about it. So many stories from that time and place ended in tragedy, in loss, in the grinding difficulty of frontier life. But this story, the story of the mail-order bride and her man-hating cat and the grieving cowboy who loved them both, ended exactly as it should, with a family, with love, with a legacy that would outlast all of them. It ended with proof that even the most damaged souls can heal, that trust can be rebuilt after betrayal, that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. It ended with the promise that happy endings are possible, even probable, if we are willing to do the hard work of opening our hearts after they have been broken. And it ended with the image of an orange cat, scarred and battle-tested, purring contentedly on the lap of a man he once hated, surrounded by a family he helped create, in a home built on the foundation of patience, understanding, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better than today. That was the real magic of the story, the truth at its heart that made it worth telling and retelling. That change is always possible, that healing is always within reach, that love is always worth fighting for, and that sometimes, just sometimes, all you need is time, patience, and a cat wise enough to recognize a good man when he finally appears, even if it takes a while to admit it. The Crawford Ranch still stands today, though it has passed through many hands since Eleanor and Lucas's time. But the old oak tree remains, marking the place where the family rests, and locals still report seeing an orange cat wandering the property on quiet evenings. Whether ghost or descendant or simply legend made visible by wishful thinking, the cat serves as a reminder of the story that began it all. The tale that proved sometimes our greatest disasters are actually our greatest blessings in disguise. And sometimes a traumatized cat sees truths that humans miss. And sometimes the hardest path leads to the most beautiful destination. Eleanor Whitmore arrived in Silver Creek with nothing but a cat and desperation. She left this world surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, her legacy written in the lives she touched and the love she shared. And through it all, from beginning to end, a scarred orange cat watched over her, protecting her, guiding her, teaching her that even the deepest wounds can heal given time and the right companion. It was a Wild West love story, yes, but it was also something more. It was a testament to resilience, to hope, to the transformative power of choosing love even when fear seems safer. It was proof that happy endings exist, not because life is easy, but because people are capable of extraordinary courage when given the chance. And it all started with a hiss, a growl, and a wicker carrier on a dusty platform, where a woman and a cat began a journey that would change both their lives forever, leading them exactly where they needed to go, to exactly the people they needed to meet, to exactly the love they both deserved but never thought they would find. That was the story. That was the legacy. And that was the truth that the Crawford family carried forward through the generations, that love finds a way, healing is always possible, and sometimes the most unlikely companions lead us home.